All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone, wherever in the world you're joining us from today. Welcome to MIT Sloan Executive Education's LinkedIn Live event. Delighted to be welcoming you to the special Earth Day LinkedIn Live with MIT Sloan's Jason Jay on how leaders can focus their sustainability efforts. I'm Jess Luma. I'm Assistant Director for Digital Deliveries at MIT Sloan Executive Education. I also have a graduate certificate in natural resources management. And if you've ever visited the New England Aquarium on a Saturday, you may have seen me diving in the tank there. I'm a volunteer there. So this is a very special topic area for me to be diving into today, if you'll excuse the pun. If you've been to one of our LinkedIn Lives before, you know our goal is to provide insights that you can immediately apply, and I'm sure there will be many today as we talk with Jason. If you'd like more insights from MIT Sloan, I encourage you to follow us on LinkedIn. So we will have some time at the end of today's chat for questions, so please feel free to use the comment box if anything comes up along the way, if you have a question for Jason. And with that, I'd like to introduce Jason Jay. Jason Jay, very excited to have you here today, Jason. Jason Jay is the director of MIT Sloan Sustainability Initiative and a senior lecturer in the MIT Sloan School of Management. His teaching, research, and community building help people navigate the tensions that arise as we simultaneously steward our own resources and the long-term health of our people and planet. He facilitates strategy development for companies, organizations, and business families, building alignment and shared commitment to ambitious goals. His clients have included Sun Life, EFG Asset Management, Novartis, Bose, Environmental Defense Fund, BP, and the World Bank. Jason's writing appears in the Harvard Business Review, Sloan Management Review, the Academy of Management Journal, and his book, Breaking Through Gridlock, the power of conversation in a polarized world. Thank you so much for being here today, Jason. Anything you'd like to add before we dive into our chat?
No, that's great. Thanks for the kind introduction and for organizing this, Jess.
Happy to. All right. So in your work, you have written that companies may be very focused on their corporate strategies, maybe not so focused when it comes to their sustainability strategy. They might be trying to do it all. So what would you say is the biggest mistake companies make when trying to do it all in sustainability?
Sure. So I think that it's in part the fault of us as academics who are working in the sustainability space to try to define a holistic and inclusive systems approach or definition of sustainability, that there are a lot of different issues and domains that fall under the broad umbrella that we might think of in terms of ESG or sustainable business, or other terms, and responsible business. And so we want to be thinking comprehensively in an integrated way about poverty and international development, social equity, labor standards as on the S part of sustainability, as well as climate impact, toxics, biodiversity on the environmental side, and how those things are interwoven with each other and with corporate strategy. So we want companies to take a holistic approach and to be thinking comprehensively. But the result of that is that there are far too many issues and domains for companies to really focus their attention. And we just as one sort of example of this, our Aggregate Confusion project, which is the project where we do research on ESG measurement, and the name of our project should give some hint at this, is that there is just tremendous variety of different issues. When my colleagues here at MIT Sloan developed a taxonomy of ESG issues to help compare between different rating agencies for how they were assessing companies, there were 64 different indicators or attributes of companies, ranging from electromagnetic field pollution to animal rights to human rights. So if a company is trying to check all of those 64 boxes, their attention is going to be spread really thin. And so I think it's just not possible to do everything everywhere all at once. So that's the first sort of thing, is just to say that I recognize that there is a tension between trying to be holistic and trying to be focused, and not noticing that tension. And then the other thing is that when companies do try to focus, the main kind of technique or instrument or tool or approach that they use to do that is a materiality analysis. And materiality is the sort of lingo in the sustainability field for, how to choose which information is material to share with outside audiences. And I think the key problem is that that's a concept that comes from the reporting world, not from the strategy world. It comes from an effort to say, this is the information that's material to investors and other stakeholders that you might want to report on. It doesn't come from materiality as an approach, doesn't come from a strategic inquiry about where do we need to allocate our attention and resources for long-term innovation and collaboration. So it might be feasible to report on 12 or 15 or 20 different indicators or attributes, but it's really not possible to have 15 or 20 strategic priorities that are really drawing your efforts. So that failure to make a distinction between a reporting approach to this question of focus and a strategy approach is, I think, the main sort of breakdown here that we're trying to address.
Got it. So what would be your recommended approach then to be more strategic? How can a business figure out which sustainability issues would be the ones, maybe of those 64, that would actually be worth it for them to focus on?
Well, what we've tried to offer is a framework and an approach to doing that, and this is something that Kate Isaacs and Lin Wen and I published in the Harvard Business Review this winter on it's called Getting Strategic About Sustainability, 4 Lenses for Focusing on What Matters. And what we suggest is that people go through an inquiry that looks somewhat like aspects of a materiality analysis, or particularly what's now called a double materiality analysis. But they do it really with an eye toward initially widening, but then really narrowing the scope. And so what we suggest is that what these 4 lenses are is that you look at, and we have a little visual that we can share that sort of showcases these, is that there's a couple of questions that ask, that kind of dilate the view a bit. So we want to look at, from a stakeholder influence perspective, what are people trying to tell us? What are we hearing are important issues from the variety of stakeholders that are out there that are making demands or requests on us? And anyone who's in a company that is in the limelight knows that there's a huge variety of stakeholders posing questions about a huge variety of issues. So that is part of being contextually aware and listening. But it also means that you're going to have an initially large set of potential things to be paying attention to. And then we try to sort of narrow those things down. So the science and technology lens asks, what do the data say about our impact in the future? If we can actually look at some science that's independent of those stakeholder views, looking at a life cycle analysis of our products, or a living wage analysis of our supply chain to say, where are there real hot spots, not just hot button issues, but sort of real hot spots that we need to pay attention to, and where the data are really pointing on increasing problems or increasing opportunities that we can be paying attention to. And then we can distill those further to which of those opportunities or risks are really significant to the bottom line. That's this business value lens on the bottom, where there is some way that if we address these issues, it's going to have a meaningful impact on reducing our costs because we're spending a lot of money on energy or waste or materials, for example, and we've got to get those costs down. Or conversely, where are on the revenue side, where are the stakeholders, the potential customers, really voting with their wallet and choosing to buy from companies and from products that are more responsibly made, and that business value lens tends to tighten the aperture a bit to say, what can we really quantify in bottom line terms, and then oftentimes you're still after that exercise and you're looking at what's at the intersection of those 3 circles. There's still a few too many. And so really asking deeper questions about purpose ends up being the real linchpin. that's the thing that really ends up being a focusing device, is to say, what do we really stand for as a company? What are our values and our vision and our purpose and our founding ethos really tell us need to be squarely in our emphasis. So while the other ones can be a little bit kind of outside in, looking at what the world is trying to tell us, there's an inside out dimension to this. That is, what are we really trying to do in the world? And so that star at the center of the diagram is intended to indicate that the issues that show up again and again across all four circles are the things that are really merit that strategic focus. And there may be another concentric circle around that, which are the things that you might report on in a corporate responsibility report, but there's only a subset of things that you're really deeply engaging on, persisting over time, investing significant resources, innovating, building long partnerships to really make big change. And that's what we mean by strategy, is what are the things that you're saying yes, a deep yes to, and saying no to other things to help get focus. So that's kind of the overall approach that we suggest, is have that scanning outside in situational awareness look, but then also come from the inside out and ask, who are we and what are we really trying to do?
I love that, being able to say a deep yes to something. Thanks for sharing that framework. And I know you've seen in your research that maybe companies end up focusing on something that's not kind of at that overlap in the middle. Maybe it's something that is aligned with the science, but doesn't really have a business case for focusing on that. Why would you say it's so hard for companies to say no to some of these environmental, social, governance issues?
Yeah. Well, I think the place where it gets really hard to say no to things is when there are forceful stakeholders demanding attention on something, right? So for example, in the HBR article, we use the example of Keurig, where you're making a single serve coffee pod that is which is allowing for the convenience of the on-demand customized cup of coffee, right? But it at the end of running the machine for a cycle, you've got this pod that's spent, and which you now have to deal with, and so there's this salient experience of the customer, which is, I've got this waste that I now have to throw away, and I'm going to feel bad about throwing it away or it's accumulating in my trash can or whatever. And so the end of life of the coffee pods becomes just it's really salient to the key stakeholder, which is the customer. And then also others who are, thinking about, well, what about in municipal waste processing facilities? Like, how are they dealing with these coffee pods that are coming out of offices? And you see this also, it's funny, not even just for Keurig itself, but for Keurig's customers. When we go out and engage with companies and to do part of their, materiality analysis or scanning, they ask their employees, right, as a key stakeholder group, what are you worried about with the sustainability of our company? And the employees will often say, well, there's this coffee machine in our office kitchenette. It's making all of these wastes, right? And it's like, you're a car company or like an airline, right? Or something with like really big, significant industrial impacts on the environment. And you're worried about the office coffee pods, right? There's some way in which there's a mismatch in terms of scale there, but it doesn't mean that it's any less meaningful or salient to that stakeholder who's seeing that and experiencing it. You can do, even within Keurig, you can do a life cycle analysis of different ways of making coffee and find out that the carbon footprint of the pod isn't bad. Like, it's not, relative to, making a pot of coffee and leaving it on a warmer all day and then throwing half of it away at the end of the day. It's more efficient to put just the right amount of coffee, water, and heat into the cup. But that's not what's salient to people. So there's, when sometimes there is a mismatch between a sort of hot button and a hot spot, and sometimes you really have to go with what the stakeholders are demanding of you, because it's really going to affect your revenue and your license to operate and the public discourse about your company. And so, for Keurig, that does end up being an important line of innovation. for a lot of companies where the employees may have said, like, I'm worried about the office coffee machine, like but there's really bigger significant issues to deal with, you might want to write that off. So I think that's a piece. Another example of a moment where stakeholder demands become really salient would be all the work around climate after the Glasgow round of the COP negotiations. You had this wave where all financial institutions were sort of signing up for these agreements to try to take their portfolios to be net zero. And then that led to a pressure on companies and portfolios to set net zero targets and to disclose and to move forward on a climate journey. And the reality is, yes, climate is an all hands on deck topic where every sector, in a sense, touches. We've built our industrial economy around fossil fuels and CO2 production, and so everybody participates in it. But it is kind of the case that there are companies where climate change is not the most important issue for them to be grappling with. Right? There are companies which are relatively virtualized. I'm thinking about a company like Visa, for example. Like they're a pretty virtual company. There's not big industrial processes. Yes, there's data centers that they're using, but at the end of the day, if I really want to think about sustainability and responsibility issues for Visa, there's a whole set of things around financial inclusion and around privacy and data governance and how the data that Visa has about our purchases interfaces with authoritarian regimes. Like, there's a set of things which are really squarely critical for Visa, where them having to do a whole detailed scope 1, 2, 3 carbon footprint analysis and an action plan to meet a science-based target, et cetera. I'm not sure that's the best use of corporate resources, right? Like, they may have to report on it. It's part of being part of the broader movement, but it's an example where there's where the stakeholder pressures are what's driving the definition of what sustainability means for that company in a way that I think ends up overweighting that one lens. When if we really look at kind of the purpose, the bottom line, the meaningful impacts in society, we might look elsewhere.
Got it. Yeah. So it sounds like stakeholders maybe sometimes have an outsized impact in making these decisions. And as you said, you got to listen to them to some extent. But what would you advise a company do if they're feeling overwhelmed by those stakeholder demands?
Yeah, I mean, this is a question I get a lot in various different forms. I mean, I remember a couple of years ago, I'm on a stakeholder review panel for Nike, and they sent me a survey to respond to. And it was, the question was, which of these stakeholder information requests should we respond to? It was like, here's all of these different surveys that we're being asked to fill out. And I was, so I opened the thing up and I just wanted to scroll through it just to kind of preview it for myself. And I'm just scrolling and scrolling and scrolling and scrolling, right? It's like, okay, there's investor groups, there's journalists, there's industry groups, there's NGOs, multi-stakeholder coalitions. These are alphabetical. We're still on the G's, right? And every one of these is a really significant piece of work to go and respond to these different issues, right? To these different information requests. And then within those, they're asking questions about a huge array of different sustainability issues. Even just within DEI, there's a subset of issues. And so I think this was like a really good representation of, what how many demands companies are under now. And so, can you just say no to these things? I mean, that's, in a sense, what I would like this Four Lenses framework to do is empower people to some extent to be able to say no to some things, to say, look, we've heard you that there's an issue we should be looking at, and B, when we've gone to look at this relative to the other impacts that we're focusing on, relative to the other issues where we really think we can lead and innovate on, because they align with our purpose, our business strategy, our capabilities, what the data is really telling us about, our read of what the data is really telling us with these scientific studies. My hope is that the other three lenses give you the ground to stand on to be able to say, we're not going to work on this issue because it's important. It's important. It's not that we disagree with its being a relevant issue, but it's just like Nike's electromagnetic field pollution is insignificant, so we're not going to, concerned about it. Go knock on, Verizon's door, right? Or if there's the next concentric circle is like, yeah, you know what? Thank you. We're going to report on this. We're going to give every couple of years update on our take on this issue. But it's not going to be it's not going to be a key focus of investing our resources and for innovation and collaboration. And so I think that's I think the ability we need to equip companies with the ability to say no, and to have the confidence in doing that. Otherwise, there's just this kind of centrifugal force of that the companies are faced with.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's really powerful. That ability to say no. On the flip side, though, interested to hear about a time when that stakeholder pressure maybe did align, and they said yes. And wondering if you have an example of when that stakeholder pressure turned into innovation for a company.
Sure. No, and those examples are rich and super fun. One that's very top of mind for me, and which we talk about in the article, but it actually is just constantly unfolding, and which is a guest live case that we bring into our teaching actually here at MIT Sloan. Is there's a group, an NGO called HEAT, which is originally the Home Energy Efficiency Team. And they had teamed up with a climate activist group called Mothers Out Front, who were concerned about climate impacts of the energy system more broadly, but particularly were focused on the leakage of methane from the natural gas system. Natural gas or fossil gas or methane gas, however you want to label it, which we use to heat our homes here in New England, and to power plants, is a potentially lower carbon form of electricity than coal. But the sort of asterisks on that is that if methane is leaking across the supply chain, then that methane has 60 to 80 times the global warming potential of CO2, and it can negate a lot of the climate benefits of moving to from coal to gas, or from heating oil to gas. And so methane leakage matters a lot, and methane leaks in the residential environment pose a safety hazard and a toxicity hazard to trees if it's sort of bubbling out of the pipes. And so there was this major activist campaign that mounted here in the Cambridge, Boston area, actually, against the gas companies. And Eversource, in particular, was a focus of that activism, because they were the local gas provider. And these activists posted signs they went out and had a way of detecting where the big methane leaks were, and they put up signs saying methane is leaking here. Call your gas utility. And so it led to this huge flood of phone calls to the gas company that they got overwhelmed. They have to manage their crews carefully so that they're responding to gas leaks that are in confined spaces that could be an explosion risk for safety purposes. And so the outdoor leaks hadn't been a priority for them. And in fact, when they got overwhelmed by all these calls, they felt like there was a risk there that they would maybe miss a call on a critical risk one. So they ended up making contact with these activists, and it was sort of a two-way thing. The activists had been engaging with all kinds of different stakeholders in their environment to work on gas leaks, but hadn't wanted to engage directly with the gas company. It had seemed sort of like they were the bad guys. But they came together after this activist campaign and had this sort of meeting where they said, look, the tradition in the Mothers Out Front group was to have everybody share why they care about climate and who are the people in their lives, their children, their grandchildren, that are whose futures they're concerned about. And the president of the gas company said, I'm going to tell you about my children, and I'm really concerned for their future as well. I would like for us to try to solve this problem together. And so they started to work together, the activists and the gas company. And what happened is that the first innovation was that they developed a new mechanism for measuring these high volume but non-confined gas leaks. It had been previously either very expensive or inaccurate to measure those gas leaks, and there was a collaboration between academic researchers, the heat advocacy group, and Eversource, and they developed this new mechanism so they could actually go out and measure all the gas leaks. And then they worked, and then they created a consortium among the gas companies here in Massachusetts that all jointly asked the regulators to require them to measure these high emitting gas leaks, so that they created kind of level playing field for everybody to go out and measure and then create an action plan for reducing these mega emitting climate relevant gas leaks. And so you had this innovation in a practice, you had an innovation in a policy, and then you had an innovation in the operations to actually reduce the leaks. And then the story continued where where he came back to the Eversource. They said, so, we know you're a gas company, but we're thinking that eventually we want to not be using gas at all. So would you like to work with us on getting off of gas? Which was kind of an even more controversial and provocative stakeholder demand. But they were posing that question because they had an answer to it, which was something that's called district geothermal, which is the idea of repurposing the gas pipes in a neighborhood and the tunnel, the kind of excavation capabilities to do that, to, instead of pushing gas through those pipes, push a water or kind of geothermal heat transfer fluid. And then you can use, so then instead of every house having to drill a geothermal well, you could just use the shared infrastructure of the neighborhood to exchange heat with the underground. It's far more efficient than air source heat pumps for both heating in the winter and cooling in the summer. And you fast forward, and now there are multiple pilot installations of district geothermal. First one in Framingham here in Massachusetts, that Eversource is actually implementing and becoming a national model, and actually an international model, where the World Bank is now investing in these district geothermal systems around the world. And so there's a whole innovation process here, and part of what they're working on is an innovation in the business model for the gas company, so that instead of buying gas and selling it, they are providing heating and cooling, which is ultimately what people want, without the explosive risk and indoor air quality and other issues associated with combustion. So that's an example of a whole arc of innovation that started with kind of that stakeholder, pounding on the door kind of moment. And but if you think about that story from this Four Lenses perspective, right? at the end of the day, it's like, okay, well, from a science perspective, what are the biggest impacts of a gas company? Yeah, methane leakage and gas, fossil related emissions, like that's clearly squarely a big impact of the company. You think about business value, and it's like, well, ultimately, we're buying gas and leaking it, or we're buying gas and selling it, but the markets are volatile and the world has had increasing demand for these fuels. So it would be a lot cheaper for us to just deliver a different way of delivering heating and cooling, which in fact is our purpose. Our purpose is not selling fossil fuels. Our purpose is to make homes safe and comfortable to live in, in the right thermal comfort and health and safety associated with that. So if there's another way we could fulfill that purpose, great. So I think so this is an example where that knock on the door can really drive innovation when it's aligned with these other aspects. But you have to have the courage to listen and the courage to explore and to innovate.
Sure. Wow, that's incredible. It sounds like really a win-win-win for them. That's great. What would you say maybe if someone is just starting out though, so they haven't used the Four Lenses framework before, but they're looking to start using it? What is maybe the first step you would recommend that they take?
I think the first step is to just see how much do we already know, right, around these four lenses. Like, in a sense, there's a set of questions being posed and a set of tools that we talk about for going and answering the questions. But again, the reality is that for a lot of companies that are already doing some kind of sustainability reporting, and they may have already done a materiality analysis, they may have already gone through some aspects of these processes. So for a lot of companies, the first step is just to say, like, which of these rabbit holes have we already gone down, right? I would say the key, though, is that in a lot of situations, the conversation about corporate sustainability strategy has been pigeonholed off into a VP of sustainability or a chief sustainability officer type of role. And those roles, which really started to emerge in the early 2000s, became more of a norm in the corporate world in the 10s. Very exciting. And because of all these stakeholder demands for information, became very heavily absorbed in reporting and in doing the materiality analysis necessary to figure out what to report on. And while the other members of the C-suite and the board might sign off on that materiality analysis and sign off on the integrated report that they put out to the financial markets, companies vary a lot in the degree to which that board and the core C-suite executives are deeply engaged in this question of sustainability strategy. And so I think a key early step is really engaging that kind of governance level of the company and saying, this question of sustainability strategy is not a question we can just hive off and delegate to the VP of sustainability for a corporate report. Like, this is corporate strategy, period. This is just how we're allocating our resources and our innovation efforts. And we need to all be thinking about this together with the contextual awareness, the best contextual awareness that we can have. And so there's a how much of these questions have we already asked, but the key is, who are you presenting that information to, and who are you engaging in that question and that conversation? And I think this is really a board level inquiry, and so engaging the board is, I would say, kind of a first step, like an early step. It may seem like a hard one, but the whole point is that this is really going to be about what long-term significant investments are we making in innovation and collaboration, and what issues really merit that level of seriousness. And you can't delegate that to any one particular job function or role.
Mm-hmm. So you've touched on this a bit in terms of like how to frame this when you're bringing it up maybe to the board. But if a leader were to get pushback, how would you recommend they handle pushback if they're saying we shouldn't actually be taking on this particular ESG issue?
Okay. So the company is trying to say no, and people are like, wait, you cannot ignore this.
Mhm.
That sort of outside stakeholder pressure. Um, yeah, I'm not sure I have kind of general advice. I would say that in a way, it comes down to the quality of conversation. So if I have an angle on that question, it comes from the book Breaking Through Gridlock that Gabriel Grant and I wrote about having challenging conversations about sustainability issues, where if the stance is kind of dismissive and arrogant and like, we've got this, buzz off, right? That is going to just create more sort of, oh, wow, they're not really not listening to us, right? If the stance is kind of defensive, like, oh, no, we've already got this, like, you don't need to, that's also not going to work, right? So I think there's a way of being in those conversations, which is a kind of openness to listening and to helping people feel heard, that you took the concerns seriously. But also this kind of the deep confidence and security that comes from being grounded in purpose, and being grounded in having done your homework, right, on the other lenses, and to say, I hear these concerns, and I think they're real in the world, and they're meaningful, and we've critically evaluated them, and let me just repeat back what I think I've heard you ask for, right? And then here's, when we've gone through our inquiry, here are the things that are really stand out for us, that are aligned with our ability to do business here, and where we really need to be focusing our attention. And so this is why we're making the choices that we are. And we can only really make serious long-term commitments to, a few key directions of innovation. So which of those do you think we should let go of in order to pursue this thing that you're asking for, right? Given everything that we just said. And I think, so you're having empathy for their perspective, but you're also inviting them to have empathy for your perspective as a company, to say, we want to do our best, and this is what we're going to have to do our best in. And so, and I, in some cases, that may not be that satisfying, but in some cases, it might work. It kind of depends on the stakeholder and the quality of the relationship. The other possibility, I think, is that sometimes really working hard on a sustainability issue doesn't line up with the business value lens or circle or case, because the incentives aren't designed correctly, right? So for example, if we think about end of life and waste from products, right? If companies don't have a kind of requirement to be responsible for the end of life of their products, it's very expensive for them to do, all of the sort of take back and reprocessing and recycling and everything else. And if they, so you may have to tell the person who really wants you to work on that to say, go work on a policy initiative that will create extended producer responsibility around this product category, and we will participate in it, and we won't block it, right? But we're not going to actively drive the bus on this, so that the stakeholder attention can be directed to other avenues of change that may be more effective than sort of pounding on the door of each individual corporation in the space. Ultimately, a lot of these sustainability issues require some kind of systems change, some kind of policy change. And sometimes, people are knocking on the door of individual companies because they just want to find someone who can take action. But it's the second best solution to have voluntary action by individual companies, and we want some kind of bigger change. And companies need to not get in the way of that change and lobby against it, but they don't have to lead on every issue.
Sure, that makes sense. I want to go to a question from the chat. So looking at the impact of trying to implement an initiative on operational teams. So Navneet asks, how can I align and prioritize diverse sustainability and compliance requirements into a focused strategy that drives real business value without overwhelming operational teams?
Navneet, thank you so much for this question. I think this is really the most important critique to our work on this topic, right? Which is that, look, Jason, you're saying that we can use these lenses, we can focus down on this like few set of issues and really innovate on those. But I might just have requirements, like legal requirements or sort of really strong customer compliance requirements that are just table stakes. And if I don't do these, maybe it's the ISO certifications that you are involved in directly, Navneet, or the corporate responsibility reporting directive in the corporate sustainability reporting directive in Europe, or the California laws for climate disclosure. And it's like, I just have to do it because I'm above a certain size, whether or not I'm told, whether or not this 4 lenses thing tells me that that's where I should focus. And Daniel Aronson, who's a sustainability advocate and consultant, engaged with me on exactly this topic in a LinkedIn sort of comment debate that I thought was quite useful and interesting. And it is the reality that companies are under more and more expectations and requirements, right? So there's a progression, or a progression makes it sound like it's a necessary evolution, but there tends to be this evolutionary process from individual companies taking voluntary action to soft law, meaning standards, NGO expectations, to those things becoming codified into hard law, meaning legal requirements. An example would be, carbon reporting voluntarily done, then becoming kind of a norm through CDP and SASB mechanisms, to then, the CSRD and the California requirements codifying those GHG reporting frameworks into law. And so if you're finding yourself in a situation where you're under legal requirements to not just report on stuff, but sometimes act on it, like in the European Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, the CSDDD, it's not just about measuring or assessing whether there's human rights violations in your supply chain. You have to take proactive action to be mitigating those issues. And so you can't, it's one thing to tell a sort of stakeholder, a kind of activist NGO that's knocking on your door. Telling them no is very different from telling the government that is, giving you the formal license to operate, will tax or fine you for failure to, comply. So you may have to just check some boxes. And what I want to just suggest is just to notice that the box checking activity is just a different activity from the strategy setting activity. And you might have to have a legal compliance group and a corporate sustainability reporting group who are making sure that that you've got the plumbing of transparency, and that you're reporting on the things you're required to report on. It's a different activity to go to have this board C-suite level conversation about what are the 2 to 4, 5 max strategic priorities that we're really going to significantly invest in. And, you might have to walk and chew gum at the same time, in the sense that, those things are unavoidable. I do think that there's also a legitimate sort of voice that companies can have in the development of some of these standards and rules to say, let's have some kind of a materiality process so that we're not having to take as full action on every one of the 64 indicators.
Great. Thanks for that response. Wondering if you have any examples you can share of an industry that you've seen is really good at focusing their sustainability efforts.
That's a good question. I guess one place my mind goes with that question is the highly regulated industries where and I'm thinking about electric and gas utilities, for example, in environments like Massachusetts or Northern Europe, that are where there's significant relatively more social attention on sustainability issues. Those companies tend to say, look, like customer safety, worker safety, pollution, air pollution, and climate change, right? Like it's something about kind of in the G bucket, something about like kind of transparency about their dealings with the government around their lobbying, and the reality is that these are companies that are granted monopolies by a regulator, and in exchange they have to sort of be accountable on a lot of these things, and there's some alignment there where the affordability of the energy is another key factor, and they're trying to triangulate between affordability, pollution, safety. It's a pretty small, consistent set of things that require real physical capital investment, real human capital, training, and infrastructure and development, and where there's sort of the stakeholder environment and the expectations being created is pretty consistent. Now, sometimes new issues, new ways of framing the issue, or new angles on the issue arise, like methane leakage in the story I told earlier. But I don't see, or data privacy issues, around utility data and things like that. So it's not that there aren't some bubbling up of new issues and around the edges, but at the end of the day, the energy utility space is like reasonably coherent and simplified in terms of what invest. Now, whether they're under enough kind of pressure to move fast enough to decarbonize, for example, that depends on the strength of those regulatory regimes. But we have cap and trade for carbon in certain places, like in New England, where we see faster decarbonization of the electric grid than in other places. So that would be one example. But I think that's kind of a outside-in driven level of focus, where it's the kind of social expectations and regulatory requirements that are creating the sort of narrow set of things to focus on. I think a more interesting question, like another kind of example to answer that question would be, are there places where a more inside-out, purpose-driven inquiry has led to some kind of consistency of focus? And I would say in there, I would probably look to the outdoor apparel and equipment industry, right? So where you have companies like Patagonia and REI that have said, look, our whole purpose is about enabling people to interact with nature, right? And so let's try to be as nature positive as we can in the way that we do things, make things. Like let's, in terms of greener materials, in terms of having end of life strategies, in terms of, and that spilled over somewhat into the sort of also thinking about labor practices and supply chains as being a pretty consistent emphasis there. So that's a place where it's not like there's a big kind of regulatory regime around the outdoor industry, but there's some convergence and some consistency there about what people are focused on. That said, it's not that there aren't big issues that are emerging, right? Sort of microplastics from eroding synthetic fibers in clothing being, one that people are kind of puzzled about how to deal with there. But that would be an example where there's sort of an industry purpose that aligns with company purpose, that aligns with a certain set of sustainability issues that might be another example.
Great, thank you for sharing. I wanted to go to another question in the chat, and again, if anyone has other questions, please feel free to post. We should have time for another one after this. So Zainiel asks, what strategies can be adopted to maintain high service standards in the hospitality industry while ensuring sustainability?
Okay. Cool. I haven't directly worked on that question. I guess the way if I read your question right, Zainiel, it's that there is some trade-off that we might be expecting where, and so the question, and then you're sort of posing the question as like, hey, there might be a trade-off here. How do we break that trade-off? And by the way, I'll just say that in general, that's how I think about sustainability-oriented innovation. Is the default practice creates some kind of trade-off, like we want to provide people with heating of their homes, but we also want to have a safe future climate, and the way that we're doing one is harming the other. So can we look at that in a two-dimensional space where like we can innovate to break that trade-off and find some way to provide heating and cooling of people's homes without the methane and CO2 emissions? And it's exactly that kind of innovation that requires working together with people over time, investing capital, paying significant attention, all the things that you need strategic focus to be able to do. So if we sort of apply that framework here and say, in the hospitality industry, what are some of the trade-offs that we face where having high service standards might work against sustainability? And so if that service standard means that I'm going to wash, dry, and iron the sheets in your hotel room every single day during your stay, right? That might be a high level of service standard for some definition of impeccable service, but is a energy and water intensive way of managing the hotel room. And so in that situation, like, well, how do you break that trade-off? Is there a trade-off that's meaningful? How do you break it? And, we've seen that some playbook in the space about, at least with towels, right? The signage and so on saying, if you hang up your towel, we're not going to replace it so that we can save some water and energy. And we're going to kind of enlist you in getting to feel good about that. And you getting to participate in that. So I think I think part of that implicitly is this kind of reframing of what high service standards are, so that people aren't expecting a kind of high impact and unrealistic standard. I don't know, but that's now the other way to break those trade-offs would be to figure out ways to wash and iron the sheets with far less energy and water, whether that's through gray water recycling systems in the buildings or, cold water detergents or, other things like that, which are other kind of more material type innovations. I think the key is and again, I don't have answers to this because I haven't worked in the hospitality industry, But I would just go back to sort of the process that I'm describing, which is first to really use that science and data and tech lens to say, what does the data tell us are the really important impacts that we're having in sustainability as you're defining it? And what are the things, where are the places where we are experiencing the biggest tensions and trade-offs, where we really want to be providing high quality service and that's not working in line with sustainability? And then getting cross-functional teams together to say, okay, let's not take this as necessary. Let's look at this one-dimensional sort of trade-off view and say, let's put this into 2 dimensions and say, we care about both service quality and sustainability. What are the things that are going to push that frontier out and allow us to innovate and find something that is going to do better for both? And then let's experiment and test that out in a couple places and see if we can make the economics work and see if people respond to it and then scale it up. Again, the whole point is that process takes energy and time, and you're only going to do that about a few things. So get those focal points right. I hope that's sufficiently satisfying, given that I don't have, kind of the industry knowledge on that one.
Thank you for that, Jason. I know we're getting close to the hour, but we did have one more question from the chat I wanted to ask you. This is from Anne-Marie, who thanks you and asks, once a company has determined its strategic focus by using the 4 lenses, what's next? Determining focus is only the beginning. How should they continue to be able to translate their focus to action and innovation?
Great question. So I would say that the way I would think about this is sort of how do you design the program of sustainability-oriented innovation that is described by the focusing exercise, right? So think about, going back to the gas company example, like the program of reducing methane leakage or the program of creating district geothermal business models. So first of all, there's a couple things that are ingredients to any successful innovation program, right? One is that you want to have some people who are what our colleague Deborah Ancona here at MIT Sloan would call X teams, or kind of a set of people who have enough autonomy to be able to be working on that innovation, but are cross-functional and have a view across the enterprise, and who are funded with real money to run experiments. And to try new things, and then have the ability to iteratively experiment, right? So try things in one factory or one market, and then get some quick wins on the board that then show that, okay, there's a possibility here that we can then make a bigger investment to scale up that innovation work. So on some level, just in the same way that I'm saying corporate sustainability strategy is just corporate strategy, right? And we should be thinking about this in an integrative way. Those 4 lenses are useful for strategy in general. In the same way, sustainability-oriented innovation is similar to good corporate innovation processes, right? And we need to follow those. The difference with sustainability is that oftentimes, because what you're dealing with is kind of the externalities of the business, meaning the impacts on society and environment that you weren't previously taking responsibility for or seeing as kind of core to the business, that innovation process may involve the broader set of stakeholders. It might involve when Walmart got their sustainability strategy underway, they engaged with Environmental Defense Fund. EDF actually set up an office in Bentonville, Arkansas, to help with the operational innovation processes to support Walmart moving faster on, eliminating the waste of eggs and changing energy use in stores and things like that. So there are sometimes you're bringing new voices to the table in those X teams, let's say, than you would in other corporate innovation processes. but the key is to have real capital investment, real autonomy to pursue something new, and have some sense of getting quick wins on the board that help you build momentum, resources, and knowledge toward bigger changes across the enterprise.
Thank you for that. All right, I think that is all the time that we have. Thank you so much for your insights, Jason. Thank you to everyone from the audience for all of your great questions. If folks in the audience are interested in learning more about MIT Sloan Executive Education, they can go to exec.mit.edu to see our upcoming programs. We've got flexible non-degree courses for business leaders throughout the year, both in person and online, all taught by Sloan faculty. And again, you can follow us on LinkedIn for more insights. So thank you so much, Jason. Any final thoughts?
Thanks so much for having me, Jess. And in addition to the Executive Education Group, I'd point people to the MIT Sloan Sustainability Initiative, which is where we publish a lot of our research and insights that are coming out of this particular domain of work. And then we try to bring that material into executive programs with our friends and colleagues at ExecEd.
Great. Thank you again, Jason.
Cheers.
Have a good day, all.